Hello, I'm the executive editor for public policy at Business World magazine, and this is Policy Matters, a global initiative focused on economic recovery from the pandemic, centering on the economy, people, and vulnerable communities. Policy Matters showcases out-of-the-box and innovative policy making to ensure that vulnerable communities are not left behind. Thank you very much for your support. Welcome to Business World's Policy Matters. We are speaking with Dr. Chhibber today on the budget. Welcome, Dr. Chhibber. What are your expectations from this budget?
So I think we had a drop of -7% in growth. We have now a bounce back. We don't know exactly where it'll be, but all the projections are closer to around 9%. Even if it's a little less than that, we'll be roughly back to where we were before the pandemic started. So we'll have just caught up to that point. And within that, there have been huge distributional effects. A very large part of our population, as we've said earlier, would not have caught up to where they were. They will be worse off. There will be more poor people. There will be more firms that have been in the informal sector that have been scarred. So I think one thing that the budget could do is to make sure that those people are at least given the support for another year that they had been getting so far. And that there shouldn't be this idea that, well, everything is fine, we are back to normal now. That may be true of the GDP numbers, but it's not true at the individual level for a very large part of the population. And this will, unless this help is provided, it will have huge social impact. Children will be pulled out of schools, and their healthcare will be neglected. So that part is very important. The second is that we are still unlikely to see a very rapid revival in private investment. So government CapEx still remains a very important aspect of the budget, and whatever resources that can be found for that through assetization, through privatization, accelerated privatization, that should be done. I would say also the third thing I would emphasize, just to end this here with three big points, would be that we have seen huge vulnerabilities in the health system. Our public spend on health is only 1.3% or so of GDP. It should be closer to 3% of GDP. Of course, you can't expect to have that happen in one budget, but having an increase of about 0.5% of GDP in health to bolster the health system and at least in the next year, and then carry that forward year after year, another 0.5%, another 0.5%, another 0.5%, and use these resources from your asset monetization, privatization programs to do that, but also allow local governments to have more higher property taxation, and so that they can then use those resources also at the local level for healthcare and health systems. I think those will be very important going forward. So India is seeing, normally we see much higher CPI inflation and lower. The divergence has been lower WPI and higher CPI. This is the first time we are seeing much higher WPI than CPI. CPI is also high, not out of the band as yet, at least given the way it's measured, meaning band being 2 to 6%. So it's getting there, it's at the top end, but it's not out of the band as yet. But WPI is way off. I mean, we've seen WPI rates of 12 to 14%. And eventually those will spin back into the CPI as well, because the WPI is at the previous end of the cycle of production. So you're going to eventually see all that play out into the CPI. Of course, so I think the RBI is trying a variety of ways other than raising interest rates to suck out liquidity from the system. How far that alone can do it, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it will be enough. At some point, the RBI will have to start thinking about raising interest rates. A lot will depend also on what happens internationally, because now if the Fed goes very aggressively to raise interest rates, you should see a large movement of money out of India. India, of course, will not be as badly affected as it was at the last time when we had the taper tantrum, because sitting on very large reserves. But nevertheless, those are all vulnerabilities to be watching out for. The big factor on inflation in India is, of course, also fuel prices. If India can, so a lot of that is what happens to the international price, but also how then that translates into domestic prices. And there, I think there is some policy space, if you like, to reduce the extent of taxation, both by central governments and state governments, on prices, because our prices are very high compared to even Chinese. I did a comparison last year. We had diesel prices 50% higher than China, and petrol prices at least 20% higher than China. So if when you're competing, when your businesses are competing, these are huge cost disadvantages that you are facing as well.
What do you see as the links between democracy and the budget?
We will get over the pandemic, the COVID, hopefully. But what we will not get over is divisiveness. And, it is hard to make policy in a democratic country. But I think a model of development and governance, which is much more consultative, inclusive, between the center and the states, between the states and the local governments, between people and those that govern them, and a model that does not try to divide people, but tries to address and focus people's attention to problems of development and poverty and growth and those sorts of things, is the model that we think will do well for India. And its opposite, which is more divisiveness, will end up creating bigger problems. Just to give you a small example, several have now said we will reserve quotas for employment for our people. Well, I mean, that doesn't make any sense when investment is so mobile. So tomorrow you'll have people moving their investments to states which don't have that sort of restriction. But so it's this thing of them versus us, whether it's religion or it's by state or it's by any other identity. This kind of identity politics will not work well for the prosperous India that we need to have by the time we are at our 75th year of independence, and by the time we get to 100, we should become a developed country. But this kind of disparities and divisiveness will not get us there. Since you mentioned my book, I should just say this is the book, Unshackling India. And in it, we don't go too deeply into political issues, but we do say that wherever globally you've seen more division, you have had less economic, slower economic progress. So India must stay warned on that.
Thank you very much for that very interesting discussion on the budget, and we look forward to speaking with you again at Policy Matters.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and it was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.